A glance in the mirror. Chapter 32. Keeping up appearances. Overtime was a necessary buttress. If they were going to supplement state education by out-of-school activities like swimming and drama lessons, extra work was a necessity. Sally's decision not to move to the West Country put an end to all Terry's hopes to try to supplement his income. They had to continue living in the same manner as before. In 1965, Simon, their eldest child, was about to start primary school. David had just started swimming lessons, and Rachel was starting to walk. Ruth about to be born. It was a happy time. Both Sally and Terry were keen to see their children keep up to the required standard at school. And because Simon had had such a good start, being in a class at primary school mainly populated by girls, the standard of behaviour and learning had been high. The parents, too, had been interested in their own child's progress. It was natural for them to expect all their children to continue in the same manner. They compared their children with friends and relations, and discussed with them their views. They watched and kept note how each child progressed from birth, Sally filling in the baby book, keen to make sure nothing was missed out. They decided to do without television whilst the children were young, and this resolve was continued until the eldest was 12, when pressure from outside the home became too great to continue. This doing without television was a conscious decision by both to prevent addiction to triviality, violence and puerile programs. They paid a weekly visit to the library, where all the children drew out books to be read by the following week. This Saturday trip to the library became a routine event, come rain or shine, followed by 2 ounces of sweets each to eat on the way back home. And all this started when the eldest became old enough to benefit and continued well after the time television became a popular entertainment source. Terry was working at least 2 4.5-hour periods of overtime on top of his normal hours during the week, and on Saturdays he started at 6 until 2 in the afternoon. The midweek rate for overtime was time and a half, and for Saturdays double time. He started off from home during the week at about 7 and drove to London by either car or motorbike to be there for 8 and arrived back home around 6 normal days, and getting on for 11 on those nights overtime was worked. On those nights he arrived home at 6. He bathed the youngest children, wrapped them up in a warm towel, and they dressed in their nightclothes, and then hopped into bed. And then the nightly story would begin. These were Terry's happiest hours, spent with the children, reading their favourite stories from Anderson and Grimm's fairy stories, Wind in the Willow and the Arabian Nights. It remained his greatest blessing, and worth the heartache and financial struggle. British governments, though, continued to employ a policy that held back investment and destroyed confidence. No party had a leader strong enough to stand up to the unions, to bring about a wages policy and allow a degree of unemployment to force out the inefficient time-wasters and industrial agitators. It was in this climate that Terry and Sally were bringing up their new family. Terry had to be very circumspect about what he said at work and how he did it. Each man looked over the other's shoulder at the chaps working at the next bench. Was he achieving a faster, better job, doing more overtime, or paid a higher salary? It was impossible to relax, simply because it is essential to earn as much money as he could. Everything at home was carefully thought through, to ensure it contributed to making a good environment for the family. Educational trips to the Commonwealth Institute, museums, galleries, concerts, places of interest, and of course the library. Terry compared his living standards and expectations with his parents'. His world was utterly different. It was not just different because of material differences, for there were many, but for expectations and possibilities. His life was certainly closer to his in-laws, copying their horizons, tastes and practices, setting the standard for the children, how they would bring them up. their speech, manners and horizons. They had hopes that by adopting these ideas, they had done their very best to raise socially adaptable children, capable of achieving a happy, fulfilled life. And so far the plan was working. However, not far away, the pressures of the peer group and sexual awareness both might spoil all the good work and effort. Terry was adamant that all the children should learn to swim, so a weekly visit to North Holt swimming pool was set in motion, and they spent many hours sitting outside the pool, looking in at the children enjoying themselves. The differences between social attitudes within all classes related to the size of the family. Instead of being surrounded by a number of clambering children, the modern family could be enjoyed, and this reinforced by better living conditions. Little did Terry realize that what was about to come about. Although Harold Wilson was a skillful leader of the Labour Party, he was weak in tackling the trade unions. Unemployment was rising, and that was certainly visible in the printing industry. The government was unable to prevent the unions from demanding higher wages. The sterling crisis eventually caused the pound to fall in value. The blossoming youth culture at the country's helm gave an indication where the country was heading, as the Beatles dominated the sound waves. Within 4 years, the voting age dropped to 18. A survey by the lobby group Child Poverty Action Group showed that large families continued to be the major cause of poverty. An increase in child allowance had no effect on my income. Any increase Terry received was immediately removed by income tax. Terry's working life was greatly affected, as everybody else's was, by the antics of the few militant trade unionists. The militant tendency, the threat of walkouts, instigated almost without warning, became a weekly event. From miners to dockers, car and dockyard workers, it was depressing. A special police group was formed to deal with public unrest, usually outside the factory gates. It almost became a comedy. Jokes were made on the radio, Peter Sellers acting as a trade union official in I'm All Right Jack, with Ian Carmichael as the new employee, and commentators taking off Red Robbo, the union activist at British Leyland. Away from the influence, viewed from afar, it might well have been a good Whitehall farce. But if involved, it was uncomfortable, worrying, and lamentable. The working environment in many firms, particularly the larger ones, was strained by poor industrial arrangements. This didn't extend to all, though. Firms who distanced themselves from the unions always found a few militant members who tried to stir up unrest. Those firms that had a strong management, who laid down strict guidelines by refusing to take on known troublemakers, were not forced to, the unions not wanting a fight. The union head office treated businesses that employed union officials on national or executive councils carefully. Working conditions and arrangements were easier to negotiate with managements who stood by a firm moral code. The trade unions respected managements who understood the business, who had worked their way up the ladder into managerial positions, who were firm and polite. This strong management ethos wouldn't work so well in nationalized industries. Workers would call out allied trades and firms supplying parts or materials. Some of these activists were local part-time union officials who sat on committees, were well known at union headquarters. Being told that if they wanted employment, they would have to curb their union activities never went down well. In those instances, firms shut down their UK factories and went abroad, giving up the unequal struggle. Life at home, compensated for the stresses of work, was fulfilling. The children, well used to the routine of school, kindergarten, library and family outings. Sally gave birth to Ruth on the 2nd of September, their second girl. This was another landmark for the family, mostly graced by boys. Simon prepared to start at Longfield Primary School at the same time as Janice, the next-door neighbour's daughter. Terry remembers well his first days at Longfield. It didn't seem so long ago, remaining unchanged over the years. Excited by the thought, Simon, even though he was giving up his friends at the kindergarten, took to school easily. David, who was about to begin at the play school, taking Simon's place, was keen to get cracking, doing all the things Simon had been talking about. And when David was born in 1961, only 5% of 18-year-olds entered university. We had the goal to prepare all their children to go into higher education. Rachel was 2, sleeping in her cot in the small front bedroom. It was a lovely period, the family all doing so well, happily having many outside influences, and all taking part in the various outings and holidays. Rita, Sally's mother, was a frequent visitor, being picked up from her home by car to be taken back home in the evening. She played an enormous part in raising the children, always taking a lively interest, reading stories, babysitting, creating a link with the past. She was very much involved in all that the family was doing or planning to do, not in some interfering way, but listening to everybody, making sensible comments, thereby becoming a stabilizing element, and totally accepted. It was exactly what Terry wanted, a lifestyle dreamt about and carefully planned, requiring quite a bit of effort. It was sad his parents were not apparently interested. Terry cannot remember one visit made as a planned or off-the-cuff visit, and cannot offer any reason why they were so uninterested in seeing to their grandchildren. On Wednesday, the 7th of October, 1964, Albert stood down after playing for the last time as the Masonic Lodge organist. By this time his hearing was such that he couldn't hear the commands from the pulpit, needing somebody to sit next to him to tell him the order of service. He had done over 50 years long and valuable service. He felt the loss of being a respected key member. These, coming on top of his retirement, made him feel a second-class citizen, and within a short space of time he gave up playing the piano altogether, a habit of a lifetime, discarded. It was sad. The lack of space meant some adjustments had to be made to the sleeping arrangements of the children who were growing up. Terry drew up plans to develop the loft, to have an attic bedroom. The final drawings, prepared by an architect, were passed by the local planning authority without any restrictions. The dormer windows, one of the for the forced landing and the other for the bedroom, looked out upon the rear garden facing east, the sides of which were tile-hung. The new room measured 6 feet, where the stairs came up from the bedroom below, by 16, widening to 8 foot for the rear half. A large fitted wardrobe completed the structure, and this proved to be a boon and provided a bedroom for Simon and David, and later, when Simon went to university, to Benjamin. At the same time, they had the kitchen enlarged, taking the side wall out another 4 feet, totally revamping the interior, having the hot water system updated too. Now they felt they were making a fine start to creating a good home for an expanding family in a pleasant suburban town close to all schools. In 1965, there were still grammar schools in the borough, skimming off the top stream of junior school achievers. As each school only admitted about 30 new students per year, this restricted the social mobility of the vast majority, and even though the children could sit for an entrance the second year, to finally filter those in secondary schools. Secondary modern schools lacked the dedication of the top 2 streams, whose work ethic helped maintain a higher standard of work and discipline. Parents of high achievers kept an eye on what was going on, making sure their children were not affected by the less well-behaved bottom streams. Over 80% of the working population was a trade union member. This ensured that there should be a great bond between the Labour Party and the trade union movement. Social inclusion was part of their manifesto, and the betterment of the workers' lives included education for their children that would be free and of a higher standard. And this was to be achieved within a comprehensive system that provided lessons covering all subjects, an idea of Shirley Williams, the then Secretary of Education.